I grew up in Reading, outside London, and had no idea what film was, what a career would be in film. I used to drag my mother to Saturday morning cinema, and that was the closest I ever got to cinema. And eventually I got into art school because I hated school. You have to remember at that time we were beaten, and anybody who wanted to be a schoolmaster, the main qualification was you hate children. So I got into art school, and my mate bought an old Jag Mark 7, and like kings, him and I and our two girlfriends drove to London, and we went to see Dr. Zhivago in the Odeon, Leicester Square. So it was my first time in a big London theatre, and I actually left my body. I was just so overwhelmed with this amazing piece of work that David Lean had done. And then we watched A Man and a Woman by Claude Lelouch, which was like new cinema, jazz and music and an old Mustang driving, which I thought was just amazing. And so I still didn't know if there was a career there, and I kind of was broke. So I was putting up marquees all over the southwest of England. They employed students in Reading, and the company was there. And one day there was a prison camp in the forest, and I thought, what is going on? And I wandered over there and said, what are you doing, you guys? And they said, we're building a prison camp. And I said, but it's real. And they said, yeah, we have a homeless guy come past every day and give us sandwiches. And it's for a film set. And it was next to Pinewood Studios. So I managed to have a break. I couldn't get in, but I found a hole under the wire and got under the wire and got in, and they were filming one of the first James Bond movies, and for some reason stage doors were open and there was the lights and actors and all of this, and I just went, wow, this is something you can do. And that was it. I pursued it. I knew no one. I wrote letters. Finally, one kind producer sent me a letter saying, look, you've done art, go into the art department, that's your way in, but you'll need architecture. And my determination was so blind then that I managed to get A-level economics in a year, because I had to have 2. I already had art, got into Oxford School of Architecture for 2 years, got my diploma, and the principal said, I think you should go and do what you really want to do now, because you'll be bored for the next 2 years. And I eventually, just thundering everywhere to try to get anyone to see me, I got an appointment with a man called Charlie Bishop at Elstree Studios. I went to see him. He was doing Department S, very famous TV series in Britain. And he looked at my folder and said, look, I would take you on, but we're just finishing the series. I've made an appointment for you at Shepperton. Could you get there? And I said, yeah, of course. I went, sat down opposite John Box, who designed Dr. Zhivago and Lawrence of Arabia. And John looked at all my work, looked at me and said, look, are you willing to make the tea? And I said, I'll do anything. I got the job as tea boy. But he said something remarkable to me. He closed up my folder and he said, I'll tell you what the film industry is. You're in a desert, you've got a bottle of green ink in your pocket, and in comes the director and the producer. Cloud of dust, they arrive, and there's an aeroplane next to you. They look at it and say, wow, this is perfect. Can you have the aeroplane red by tomorrow morning? That's the film industry, he said, because you do it or you find another way or talk your way out of it. And that's kind of held me in stead from then on. And I made tea for 5 months, and the British drink tea in gallons of it. I was fresh really out of art school, joined an art department of people in suits and ties and short hair who kept telling me to shape up, stop watching all these crappy art movies, because I would go every weekend to watch Kurosawa and Buñuel and Bergman, anyone I could watch, and knuckle down and have a career. I would have none of it. And John Box really mentored me. He loved all of my clothes. He used to use them as reference for some of the colours. And I could see every time you did that, the art department were grimacing in the background. So I thought, you know what, I made sure he knew, the construction knew that I could draw and do architectural drawings. So I started to make worse and worse tea and coffee, and I watched them grimace when I left the room, and I got promoted. So I went on the drawing board, and it went very fast from there. I was offered a work at Reader Fusion. It was closing down, TV. And again, you know, these are all lessons for everybody to follow your own path. I was told, everybody in the art department said, don't go into television, that's it, the end of your career, you'll never work in film again, we don't deal with television. I took that job as assistant to an art director at Reader Fusion. The first job was down at Item Moat, a huge TV series they were doing, and I was helping him, and then he said, listen, I got to go and do all the sets in Wembley. Can you handle all this on your own? And I was left on my own to handle the whole shoot, and absolutely loved it. Then Charlie took me on Randall and Hopkirk, which is a cult TV series now, and within a few weeks I started on the drawing board. I'd drawn up a set for a mad artist, and I got called down to the floor. And I thought, oh, they can't shoot it, they're going to fire me. And in fact, they were all there, the producers, the big financier, everybody. And Cyril Frankel, the director, he said, you know, this is the best set we've ever had. Would you like to be set decorator from now on? Because the set deckers had a mental breakdown and they knew he wasn't coming back. So that was it, I leapfrogged up. And that, through a lot of some very interesting films, I teamed up as art director with a young designer for BBC who was doing feature films, and we did some really interesting stuff, and I gained so much experience while I was young, and that led to Star Wars. I was asked to go to Guaymas in Mexico and join only John Barry, Norman Reynolds, Les Dilly. There were three of them handling. This film was massive. It was a running in the 20s and 30s, and it starred Burt Reynolds, who was #1 at that time, Gene Hackman and Liza Minnelli, and they needed help. So John put me in charge. I was kind of set decorating and art directing, and Lucky Lady was written by Gloria and Willard Huyck, who wrote American Graffiti, and they were friends of George, student friends, and they were writing some of the dialogue for Star Wars. When George was asked to join Fox by Alan Ladd to direct a film, he went in with Alan Ladd's worst nightmare, a children's fantasy science fiction, and there was no box office in those days for science fiction, nothing. And so they had the film analysed that it would make gross at the box office $12 million, and they divided that in three, and that meant that they would give George $4 million. Well, the budget Gary Kurtz had made was $8 million. It so happened that UK was half the cost at the time. We were the exchange rate was half, and there were a lot of stages empty. There was no work, and so Gloria and Willard, who'd become friends with John Barry and myself, said, you better go down and see Roger and John Barry, because they're doing what you want and what you keep talking about. They're adapting old Mexican buildings into sets. George arrived with Gary, and I was dressing a salt factory at the time and shoveling salt. And George actually, which is very like him, he picked up a shovel while we were talking and was helping me shovel salt. And he said, yeah, I'm trying to make this science fiction film. So I was honest, because I said, George, I've never ever connected to any of the science fiction films that have been made so far. They look so unreal and over-designed. And what he said to me, he didn't have to say anymore. He said, well, I'm trying to make a spaghetti western in space. So, you know, my favorite filmmaker and my mentor was Kurosawa, and Sergio Leone adapted all of his samurai movies into westerns, and made for $1 million in Spain. Better, I thought, than some of the huge westerns that were made in Hollywood. So I knew exactly what he wanted, and I got hired. John Barry was the #1 hire on Star Wars. #2 was Jeffrey Unsworth, the DP who couldn't do it, and I was third as set decorator, and that was it. I was sent to London, and we began an adventure on Star Wars in August of 1975.